So welcome everyone to today's webinar on understanding the Rhodes interview. This webinar is a part of our series of online public workshops that we have been conducting as Project EduAccess in collaboration with the Rhodes Secretariat India. We conducted 6 webinars during the written application round, and are now organizing a 3-part webinar series for the interview preparation. This is an open webinar, so it is not necessary that you attend this session or watch this video only for the Rhodes Scholarship. We think that attending this session will be helpful even if you are thinking of preparing or are preparing for any other scholarship interview. So welcome to today's session. So very quickly, I will introduce you to Project EduAccess. I'll introduce you to a panelist who will then take you over some aspects of the Rhodes interview specifically, and then we will move on to Q&A. We do want this session to be as interactive as possible, so we'll keep our presentation short and then move to the Q&A. Very quickly, we are Project EduAccess. So for those of you who are joining our webinar for the first time, we believe that access to higher education, leadership, and professional opportunities is a privilege that most people from marginalized communities are systematically denied through cost, information, and dispositional barriers. And we try to improve inclusivity in some of these spaces by removing some of the barriers. Our collaboration with the Rhodes Secretariat India is one of the ways in which we're trying to make higher education, scholarship opportunities more accessible to people. So we have with us 3 wonderful panelists and Rhodes scholars who are here to talk to you about the interview process and what it looked like for them. So we have with us Daksh, who's currently doing a DPhil in economics and is a Rhodes Scholar from 2023. We have with us Shruti, who's doing a DPhil in social-legal studies and is a Rhodes Scholar from 2019. We have with us Samir, who's doing a DPhil in public policy and is a Rhodes Scholar from 2018. And I am Misbah. I am currently doing a DPhil in law, and I'm a Rhodes Scholar from 2021. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Samir to take it forward. And thank you all, Daksh, Shruti, and Samir for joining us today.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Misbah. Just a note before we start that all of us, Daksh, Shruti, Misbah, and I will be speaking in our personal capacities here, and the views that we share are not representative of the Rhodes India Secretariat or Rhodes Trust. We will be giving you information as well as advice based on our own experiences. So we hope that you will take it in that spirit. If there is any question regarding eligibility, anything formal, and you think that our advice contradicts something that is out there on the website posted by or published by Rhodes India Secretariat or Rhodes Trust, please disregard our advice on that point, right? Take our advice with that disclaimer. Great, wonderful. So just a quick recap of the application process. Those of you who have been shortlisted have gone through the written stage, which comprised of a number of elements. You were supposed to provide your official transcripts, your CV, a personal statement of around 1,000 words, and an academic statement of study of 350 words, and some reference letters. Of course, other standardized test scores are not required for this scholarship, but they may be required for your university applications eventually. We are now in the interview stage, and there are 3 interviews as part of the Rhodes Scholarship application process. There is the preliminary interview, which is the one that those of you have been shortlisted for, and then there will be 2 more interviews. There will be one penultimate interview, which happens at the discretion of the selection committee, and there is the final interview, which happens in person. Today's session is primarily about the preliminary interview, but of course, things that we say might also be helpful for you if you progress towards the further stages. Just a quick reminder of the Rhodes Scholarship criteria. When you were preparing your applications, written applications, there were two components that were prominent in this regard: the personal statement as well, and then the academic statement of study. And between the two statements, you were expected to demonstrate how you fulfill these four Rhodes Scholarship criteria. Broadly speaking, these relate to the first, academic excellence, and academic excellence is not just an eligibility criteria, but also a selection criteria. And what I mean by that is that you first need to meet the minimum sort of entry requirements of the course for which you're applying, and then of course need to show that you demonstrate academic excellence. The other Rhodes Scholarship criteria are energy to use your talents to the full, and this can be demonstrated in a number of ways, in through your involvement in sports or other ways wherever teamwork is involved. The third criteria is truth, courage, devotion to duty. So basically showing that you are a person who does not just think about themselves, but also thinks about the community and the world around you. And then, of course, the last criteria being moral force of character and instinct to lead and to take an interest in your fellow beings. Rhodes Scholarship um, looks for the leaders for world's future, and these are the four criteria that, in many ways, just demonstrate how those leaders, are identified. But of course, that's something that we can talk about in Q&As. Now, your interview, which will be the preliminary interview round. The preliminary interview is sometimes called as a technical interview round. The aim of the interview is to assess your academic and extracurricular skills. You have written a personal statement and an academic statement, overall around 1,350 words, and there's your CV and your transcripts, everything. The selection committee has read all of this. They are convinced that you are a candidate that they want to meet, that they want to interact with, to get further sort of insights into the kind of person that you are, as well as the kind of interest you have, and assess your academic and extracurricular skills. So a lot of what will happen in this interview will depend on these documents that you have already submitted. So one of the first sort of tips that we will give, and I'll start with that, is to be quite thorough with the documents that you have submitted, because you are, through these documents, making a representation to the committee that these are my interests, this is who I am, this is what motivates me, this is my passion, and the interview committee will want to hear more from you about those things that you have made a representation about. The duration of the interview will be about 15 to 20 minutes, although it may go on longer. And the duration of an interview is not indicative of anything. There may be interviews that go on way longer and they may be fine, and there will be interviews that will go on for just those 15 to 20 minutes and they'll be equally fine. So don't read too much into the duration of the interview when you have yours. The panel usually consists of 3 to 4 interviews, and one of my colleagues will speak a little bit more about this. There will be 3 to 4 interviewers who will take turns to ask questions, and not necessary that all of them do actually ask questions. So once again, just because some members or your panel are slightly passive in your interview does not necessarily mean that they are not interested. And it also does not mean that your interview did not go well. So don't worry so much about how each interviewer was participating in your interview. Was each interviewer asking you questions and asking you all the relevant questions? Don't worry so much about it, because all of them have different styles of interviewing and different techniques of interviewing, and together as a panel they decide about sort of the outcomes of the interview. So don't worry so much about how each and every individual interviewer interacted with you. some of you may face interviewers from outside your field, especially if your area of study is unconventional, but the interview will primarily focus on the documents that you have mentioned and on your interest and what you have said you want to do at Oxford. Now, this is a preliminary interview slash a technical interview in the sense that, it will be subject specific. So those of you who are law students, for example, I was a law student when I applied. I was interviewed by a law panel. So the interviewers who interviewed me were all lawyers or were familiar with the legal subject. And essentially, the interview was a lot technical in the sense that it was about things that I had mentioned on my CV, things that I had mentioned in my personal statement, and so on and so forth. And those of you, who will be from life sciences will appear before a life sciences panel, and so on and so forth. Once again, this is something that you will hear more about from my colleagues. The panel, once again, will primarily refer to your academic statement, your personal statement, your CV, and most of the questions will be centered on these documents. Even if you think that those questions that are asked of you are not centered on these documents, these are the documents that will guide the overall interview, right? It may be that you're not necessarily asked questions um, about some of the experiences on your CV or things that you're mentioned in your documents. But remember that it is those documents that you have been shortlisted on the basis of, and it is that overall sort of picture that your documents provide to the selection committee that they have in mind when they are interacting with you and when they're asking you questions. And I will now hand it over to Shruti.
Uh, yeah, so I'll take you through the next few slides. So the first is kind of just describing what is technical about this round. So as you know, there are two rounds of interviews. So the first round is the technical, and as Samir just described, a subject-specific round. So this will basically mostly focus on subject-related questions related to the research interest that you've outlined in your personal statement and in your academic statement. You might also be asked questions about recent developments within your field, but largely you shouldn't expect to be asked questions of broader general interest. Usually, I think that comes up more in the second round. So in this round, the focus is very much on your academic field. So that might be theoretical questions related to your subject, but also questions related to any experience that you've listed on your CV or related fields of interest. I think what Samir said about the documents that you've submitted is really important. So I remember in my interview, I was asked questions about my transcript. So even though that wasn't in the academic statement, I was asked a question about a grade that I had received in a class that I had taken in my undergraduate years. So I mean, just look quite carefully at the documents that you've already submitted and kind of think of questions that might come up around those. Yeah, so I think for people in quite specific fields with quite technical language, you might have to explain quite complex ideas in simple terms, particularly for non-experts. And you might be asked to provide more in-depth explanations if there's a specialist on the panel who's like asking you follow-up questions about more complex ideas or theoretical frameworks. Some questions might also explore sort of how these ideas relate to broader practical or more applied considerations. So you might also want to think about, so if your proposal is quite theoretically focused, then you might want to think about whether it has like an applied element and vice versa. If you've changed your academic field, so this is something that happened to me in the interview, so I'm happy to answer questions about that. So you might get asked questions about the subject that you did study and then why you want to move into this new field or how it might be related to things that emerged from your previous discipline or previous disciplinary interests. And yeah, I think similarly, just focus on the documents that you've already submitted. So if you've mentioned hobbies or extracurricular activities or things that you were engaged in, then you might also be asked questions about those. And something that I advise doing is actually thinking about a kind of coherent narrative for these things. So thinking about how those extracurricular activities might fit into other academic things that you want to explore, or might show that you're a more well-rounded person. So for example, if you have a hobby that isn't at all related to your academic work, you might want to show how that practice kind of enriches your broader life as opposed to being like totally related to the work that you were doing before. How do I move the slide? Okay. So in terms of what you should prepare, so like we've said before, it will primarily refer to the statements you've already submitted and your CV, with most questions focused on these documents. As I said, in my case, I was also asked questions about the transcript, so you might want to think about additional documents that you've turned in. So to prepare, you could review these statements and other documents that you've submitted thoroughly and think about questions that an interviewer might ask you. Something that you might want to do is also just give this documentation to a friend or a mentor and just ask them to think about questions that they might want to ask you at this stage. And you could categorize these questions into two types. So there's specific questions, which are related to the academic concepts and the academic work you want to do, and then general questions which address broader themes. So like we just said, in terms of whether theoretical work has like a more applied basis and the other way around. So some of that might be more general or might be more specific based on what the kind of question is. So think about answers to these questions quite carefully. And then you could also read a little bit on related topics or themes mentioned in your application. I think keeping yourself updated on latest developments within your field makes sense. And it's probably likely that you might be asked questions about that on the day. I think this point is quite important in the sense that the panelists are not looking to see that you know all of this information. Like they're not looking to see that you're a bank of information and you can provide it to them, but they're actually looking for the opinions that reveal how you think and how you express your understanding. So often when you might not know the answer to a question, they want to see how you think through that problem, or what are the different elements or variables that you're centering or foregrounding as you're thinking through a problem. So it's helpful to have thought in advance about relevant developments and to have some opinions about them. But I think it's also helpful where if you're asked a particularly difficult question, that you just think through it and articulate that thinking process in the moment as well. I think that can be helpful to do. And yeah, I think this last point is also very important. Just be ready to explain how your specific, perhaps quite niche interests fit into a bigger picture or a larger context, and try and think about its relevance to a broader audience. Yeah, so I think this bit is on mock interviews or conversations. So I think mock interviews just help you get into an interview mode, and I think allow you to practice thinking and articulating your answers. But that might not be the way that everyone likes to prepare. So just think about what works best for you and prepare accordingly. Sometimes it might just be more helpful for you to sit with your documents and to think about potential questions. But if you like doing mock interviews and it's a format that helps you prepare, then don't worry about finding an expert. You can get your friends or your family to help you. I had some colleagues at work help me, and I thought that was really just a useful way of collecting my thoughts and figuring out, like, I think also after a mock interview, then you can kind of reflect on what you wish you could have said instead, which is full practice to have on the day. And practicing with people outside your field is always a good idea, because then you will get some experience in how to explain or break down a technical topic into slightly non-technical or lay person's terms. But I would also advise to be cautious about doing too many mock interviews. You might get very conflicting feedback from different people. Like, don't let this discourage you. I think that's quite normal when you're getting quite a bit of feedback. And just kind of trust your own instinct about how best you can articulate yourself in a given moment. But the point of mock interviews or kind of free-ranging conversations that are designed to help you prepare is just that these discussions will help you organize your thoughts and then articulate them convincingly. So that's the key goal. So this is a question we get asked. I think we've just got a question in the chat about this, about who the interviewers are. So usually, as Samir mentioned, the panels are subject specific. So there's a law panel, a physical sciences panel, a medical and biological sciences panel, an engineering sciences panel, and then a broader social sciences, and then a humanities panel. And each candidate is placed in front of one of the subject-specific panels, depending on their area of study. So this is actually, so in my case, I had done a prior law degree, but I was writing in to study a degree in the social sciences. So I was actually still interviewed by the law panel. That's something you might want to keep in mind if you are planning to change fields of study. There are usually 3 to 4 interviewers per panel. The profile of the interviewers range from professionals to academics, from like people who work in industry. All the panelists are not usually Rhodes Scholars, although some of them are quite likely to be. And different interviewers will just probably take turns to ask you questions. They're all trying to play the same role, but they might have different approaches and interviewing styles and techniques. So don't let this put you off in any way. I think they're just trying to see how you react to different kinds of feedback in given situations. Right. I think I'll hand over to who's next. I'm not sure who that is, but
Me.
Yeah.
Hey. Thank you. So these are just some basic details on the technological side of things. So when you're having the interview, you'll have the interview on Zoom, and there will be a person, the tech support person, who's generally one of the older scholars, who will be helping you figuring out the interview schedule. So you know when to join the meeting. Generally, it will be that you have to join, like, say, just 2 to 3 minutes before your interview is supposed to be scheduled. You can't join later than that, obviously, because people will be waiting, and you can't join too early because there are other interviews going on. So the tech support volunteer will help you out with that. And often what also happens is that the interviews are overrunning by a little bit, by a few minutes here or there. And so once you join, they'll keep you updated on how long you are expected to be waiting before your interview starts. Before your interview actually happens, they'll also contact you if you have any problems. Generally, that can include network issues, depending on where you are right now. It can include, I think they have a preference for dates, if I remember correctly, which you can choose. So you already have some preference over figuring out if one date doesn't work for you for a very specific reason. In general, you're expected and hoped to come on the interview schedule given to you. But if for some reason that doesn't work for you, also reach out to them and ask them if you can do the other day. I think it has to be between 6 to 7 October. But between those days, you can ask for some flexibility in time or slot, right? If you really need it. And the technological support person will also be in touch with you while you're there and tell you about all the delays. And yeah, I don't think there's, okay, 5th to 6th October. So I don't think there's too much you need to know about this, except that if you have any doubts on the day of the interview, before the interview about how you have to join, this is the person who you can reach out to who will give you the details on that. Uh, can we move on to the next slide, Muspa? Yeah. So the interview will be held online over Zoom. For this, it's always important. The first and foremost thing for a Zoom interview is to make sure that your internet is stable. The best way to do this, in my experience, is to be connected on a Wi-Fi and have mobile data as a backup. So what you can do is keep your, say, phone ready with an internet, or someone's phone which has a decent internet connection ready, so that if at any point your Wi-Fi falters, you have a backup mobile hotspot connection to go to. Outside of that, make sure that you have a Wi-Fi that is stable and has a decent connection. Zoom is now advanced enough that it doesn't require a very, very high speed. As long as you have like anything above 8 to 10 Mbps, you should be good enough. Make sure that your mic is working clearly at the end of the day. If the interviewers can't hear your answer, they will let you know, they'll ask you to repeat, but that causes communication issues. And you'll also end up having to go back on things, right? Which is always a struggle. You want to be able to speak fluently and not face any disruptions on that front. And so the best way to do this is always do a test call before the interview. So this also helps you figure out things like the background. So as it says, make sure that the room is lit, make sure that your face is visible and centered, and try to preferably sit in front of a wall. Uh, Particularly if you can sit in front of anything white, off-white, cream, that really helps. So if you're sitting in front of, if you're sitting in front of that, that will make for a good background. If not, you can always use the blurred background option in Zoom. And the best way to do this again is to figure out a spot that you're going to sit at eventually, do a test run a day or so before the interview. You can also put on whatever you're going to wear for the interview. That's what I had done personally. I wore the exact same clothes just to see if they're fitting, and then I sat and did a virtual call. And that helps you test out the video quality, the audio quality, lighting, background, everything, and also the network stability. So just talk to a friend for like 10-15 minutes. That will help you figure out whether your network is stable enough, whether there are lots of glitches. Sometimes it does happen that a network can experience like repeated disconnections. So sitting for 15-20 minutes will also help you iron that out. And the last thing is obviously again like your mic quality is important, but what is also important is to be in a decently silent environment. Uh, Obviously, if there are certain noises on that day, for example, some unexpected construction is happening near your home which you weren't aware of, those are accommodations that can be made. The interview panel will understand, but it's always good to have as much mm, quiet and peacefulness as possible when you're doing the interview. And yeah, like even when you're doing the test Zoom run, do it with the microphone that you're going to eventually use. So if you're planning to use your laptop mic, test it out with that. If you're planning to use any earphones, test it out with that. In general, wired earphones have great audio quality. So especially the mics of the wired earphones are better than any wireless earphones you can get. So if you have a pair of wired earphones, that would be my recommendation. They sound much crisper and better than most wireless earphones. Yeah. Ms. Pa, do you want to change the slide? Yeah, thanks. Uh, yeah, and so just some other general tips. If you have any disability, for example, it could be related to, particularly for this, if you have any visual disability and you need someone to be there with you during the interview, you can let the panel know. If you have any auditory disability, for example, if you have hearing aids or at any point you need them to repeat the questions, you should let them know beforehand. Uh, and apart from that also, right, like if you have any disability at all and if you need any sort of support at all, one, it would be helpful to let the technological volunteer know beforehand, so that they can also convey it to the panel. But the second is when you join the call, you can let the panel know and you can ask for any accommodations and it will be completely fine. And yeah, outside of those things, when it comes to the interview, uh, most of it is going to be related to your documents, right? And one thing that is really, really helpful is to look through your CV, to look through your academic record, to look through your personal statement and read it and try to write questions with it. So what I had done was I had printed all three out, and while reading it, I just wrote like small questions next to wherever I could think of a question. And do this yourself. And if you really want to prepare, you can also. I mean, I never did this, but it's a good idea. But it's a good idea to also get a friend to do it because you have written the personal statement, you have already seen all of these documents. It's also just a little bit boring for you to just look at the same documents and again and again. So you might not be able to come up with things, but if you get another pair of eyes to look at it, they might actually spot things more easily. So that's a good way. Ask them to just like write questions on the document or just ask you questions directly. And that will really help you prepare and just think through some things. You can do this in a mock if you want, as Shruti already discussed, or you can just sit and think through those questions, whatever you find more comfortable. In general, if you're someone who wants more confidence in an interview setting, mock interviews are great. If that's not something you're too concerned about, then obviously mock interviews are also like slightly more cumbersome in that you need to arrange another person. It's time consuming and everything. So the shorter method is to just think of those questions by yourself. But yeah, it is important. Like a lot of the Rhodes application process is about introspection. So if you've done the introspection, when those questions come up in the interview, you will have some idea of the answer ready, and you'll be able to speak more fluently. Uh, so yeah, and in general, if anything is brought up by an interviewer, if they ask you a question about, oh, why did you do this? Or, well, this experience in your CV, or say, for example, for 1 year you were in college, uh, and you didn't perform as well in your academics, right? Or, for example, say you joined societies and then left it. You will know the reason for it, and you can be very frank with them about it. Uh, it really helps to put your best foot forward but also your most honest put forward, because it allows you to be candid. It allows you to not hesitate in answering things, because the version of reality that you have lived through is the one that you are most comfortable with by default. So because of that, just be frank with answering any of those questions. Um, and outside of those tips, yeah, like just treat the interview as a conversation where you can. It's not a grilling sort of interview in most cases. They just want to figure out where your academic experiences and interests lie, how much knowledge you have. The questions, even the technical ones from what I've heard, aren't often too complicated. They will generally be related to one, the field you already studied. So whatever degree you did in your undergrad. Second, the field you're interested in, and there are times where you can get a question wrong, and that's completely fine. Or if you don't know something, be candid about that as well. I got one of the questions wrong. Most other people who have been selected have gotten something wrong, or they did not know something. It's not an issue. Don't stress too much about that, because that can affect your other answers. If you don't know something, it's perfectly fine to say, I can't recall of that right now. Or say that, okay, this is what I can recall, but I'm not quite certain whether this is correct or not. I may be missing something. So it's completely fine. You don't have to worry too much about that. If the panelist is pushing back on an opinion of yours, you don't have to be to you don't have to defer to their judgment. You don't have to be like, oh, you're the senior person, I'll just agree with you. It's completely fine to also disagree with them, but do it politely. You don't have to be like, oh, well, you're completely wrong and you don't know about this, because, well, they're generally people who know quite a lot about the field you'll be interviewing in. But it's completely okay to have a different opinion, and they will respect that. So as long as you're respectful, it's okay to be different. Sorry, to have a different opinion to from the one that the panelists hold. Be respectful and engage politely. And yeah, the last thing is, and this is a crucial thing for this interview or for any other interview. I think in some of the interviews, I've seen people who are probably smarter than me, who are probably better qualified than me, who could not perform as well. And one of the main reasons is that they were too anxious before the interview. And it really hampers your ability to show who you are as a person. It really hinders your ability to actually put your best foot forward, right? Because you're too stressed about the interview. One great way of doing this is to put as little pressure on the interview as possible. The more pressure, the more strain you put on that, or the more weight you put on that one interview, the more anxious you will be about it by default, right? That's just the normal consequence of putting that much stress on something. So try to put less stress, try to prepare, but also not be too anxious during the interview, because that can really hinder your performance. And I mean, everyone has different ways of this. Like some people before interviews like to go for a walk or pace around the room because that helps with the adrenaline rush. Some people like to listen to music. I was watching YouTube before the interview. So everyone has their own ways, right? You do whatever suits you best. But it is really crucial to make sure that you're not too anxious during the interview, because it just hinders your ability to even think, right? Because your brain has gone into overdrive about the interview. So you're not able to actually think about what is being asked of you in the interview. So this is the most important tip I would say out of anything. Just make sure that you're calm, that you're able to collect your thoughts. And then, you can panic after the interview. That's what I did. It's great because the interviewers cannot see you anymore. Yeah. Misbah, do you want to go to the next slide? And yeah, so this is a general document. I'm assuming most of you would have seen the alternative guide to the written round that was shared earlier. So this is the same version but shorter because we get lazy over time. But no, like this is for the preliminary interviews, and it relates to this has been collated from experiences over years. So there's like a decade, like not decades, but quite a few years of scholar experiences that have gone into creating this guide. Uh, this is created from personal experience by past Rhodes scholars. And this will give you an idea of what to expect from the interview, how to prepare from the interview, what kind of questions you'll have. It's basically like a textual version, slightly more expanded version of this session, is what I would say. And it is really helpful. Even if you think that some of those points are things you already know, just going through it once will solidify that in your mind. And if you still have questions, obviously, there are lots of forums you can ask them on. But going through this guide is a great idea, and I would definitely recommend doing that at least once properly. Yeah. And most of your questions will end up being answered through this. There'll be a few which will be left. That's okay. But this is really helpful. I think, do we have another slide now? Oh, yeah, we do. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Perfect. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Daksh, Shruti, and Samir for going over the various aspects of the interview round. I'm just going to quickly spotlight all the speakers. And yes, we can now start asking questions. So if you have any questions for the panelists, you can raise your hand and I'll ask you to unmute. Otherwise, you can put your questions in chat. We see that there's a few questions in chat already. So while I just look over those, maybe Archie, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that was very helpful. And yeah, so my question is more about, do we also have to produce the proof of the extracurricular activities or any achievement that we mention in our CV for this preliminary round? Or like, is it for like the later part of the interview and we don't have to care about the proofs right now?
So from what I remember, the process may have changed. But so from what I remember, you're required to take the physical documents when you're going for a physical interview. In this round, no one will ask you for the certificates, so you don't have to worry about it. Uh, in general, obviously, you should have the certificates with you somewhere, but don't worry about it for this round. No one's going to ask you to bring up a certificate and show it on camera. This will just be purely an interview with no cross verification at all.
Thank you so much.
Great. So I'm gonna go over the questions in chat and then to the ones that have raised their hand. So what does discretion of the selection committee mean? We may or may not have this interview, or could we still be selected? So I'm just gonna quickly clarify this. Um, so the preliminary interview is happening. It's scheduled for 5th to 6th October. You would have received the details of when your interview is. The penultimate round, which is the second round, happens at the discretion of the selection committee, which means that it's not always that they've had a second round of interview in 3 rounds. In Maya, there was a second round of interview, but I think in Samir and Shruti's year as well, there were just 2 rounds of interviews. So it really depends. And if there is a second or penultimate round, you will know. And then there is a final interview. So the preliminary and the final are set, they definitely happen, but the penultimate one depends at the discretion of the selection committee. Okay, so what do you suggest in terms of answering the questions? How many minutes per question? And then another question is, do we get the names of our interviewers before the interview? And yeah, is it okay to have a virtual background? And what is the dress code? So maybe we can just sort of club these questions and respond to them.
I can take the first two. So in terms of answering the questions, I would say it doesn't have to be very formulaic in the sense of like, 1 or 2 minutes per question. Like some questions may require longer answers, some might require shorter ones. But I would say it's a good idea not to ramble too much. Like, pay attention to the expressions maybe on the interviewer's faces. And then if you feel like, yeah, if you see like you're repeating yourself or, just maybe try and stop and then be like, was that clear? Do you need me to clarify any aspect of that? So that's kind of the conversational aspect that I would emphasize. Um, and in terms of the names of the interviewers, so in my year, we did not receive the names of our interviewers. And I don't know if that's still the case, but yeah, it seems like everyone else is nodding. So no, you don't get the names of your interviewers before the interview.
Does anyone want to respond to just the tech aspects of whether It's okay to have a virtual background. Is there a dress code?
I think generally, I think it would be better not to have a virtual background because blurring just makes the background irrelevant, even hands irrelevant sometimes. But adding a virtual background just adds like more character to your background and distracts away from you. So you don't want that. Blurring will just achieve the same purpose, and I would generally suggest that that's better. Also, just a small tech thing. If you have a laptop that doesn't have a very powerful memory card or graphics processor, virtual backgrounds can tend to suffer more and glitch more than simply blurring. So on to be on the safer side, I would say prefer blur. And what was the other? The dress code, right? Yeah. I think it's preferable if you wear formal clothes. It doesn't matter too much as long as you're in decently presentable clothes and not in a t-shirt like I am right now. But yeah, I think it's preferable if you wear formal clothes. Uh, Preferably full formal clothes, but probably just the upper can also work. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that there's some questions that are being asked a few times on just how much one should know about current affairs, recent developments in their field. So maybe if we can all just sort of respond to that, just how much of it is specifically academics and what you've studied, and how much of it is about like current affairs, recent developments, and how much should one prepare in terms of like looking at the newspaper or going over the internet.
Okay, I can start in this. I think if the one thing that I wanted to just add on, this is something that I don't know if Shruti or Daksh mentioned, that always remember to contextualize your work within the broader picture, right? That's the that's the most important thing, especially for that narrative. And this is particularly important for STEM students. Of course, doing the work that we do just because we want to do it is also a noble cause, is also absolutely valid. But the scholarship is looking for a little bit more than why you are interested in, just because of your intellectual curiosity. So your intellectual curiosity is a perfectly valid answer. But then you also need to see how it fits the rest of the Rhodes criteria. And keeping that in mind, I think you need to be so the Rhodes looks at not just your academics, but also these other sort of extracurricular, non-academic things. And those are things about leadership, things about character, things about taking interest in your fellow human beings' lives. Now, if you were to think of a person who embodies these characteristics, you're thinking of, in my, like I use the expression, a conscious citizen, right? You're a conscious citizen who is aware of his or her field, right? Like you're aware of what you have done, but you're also aware of what's happening around you. Now, of course, as a law student, you may have read about 50 to 60 papers in law school, and you do not need to know the latest developments in each of those subfields of law, but you need to be aware of one, things that you have said you are interested in. So if there is, let's say, technology law that you're interested in pursuing, you need to be aware of some of the major things happening around it. But equally, if there are things that are happening that are of larger public interest, you need to be aware of those regardless of your interest, right? So think of what is in the news, think of what happens on, like, on not Indian primetime debates, but like generally, what happens, what's the conversation about. Now, if you are a STEM student, let's say you are thinking about, I don't know, mitosis, or that's the only thing that could come to my mind as a non-STEM student. If that's what you are working on, you also need to be aware of the general sort of political atmosphere of the country and the world. For example, there are so many pressing global issues at the moment, and as a conscious citizen, you're expected to either have an opinion or be able to show how you think through that. So, and it may be perfectly fine for you not to have an opinion if you're asked a question and you haven't thought so much about that issue or that development or whatever it is, right? But the idea would be for you to be able to think through it. And that's what the selection committee actually looks for, as opposed to polished answers and conclusions and opinions, right? They want you to be able to think through something that has been posed to you and explain that. Now, so long as you back your opinion with some sound reasoning, rational reasoning, that's what matters. You do not need to be right, and there's no wrong answer as such, right? Especially on questions that are subjective. If you're able to make an argument and you make an argument, you back it up with evidence, reasoning, and whatever it is that you rely on, I think that should be fine. So within this realm of what you're interested in, be more thorough in that field, and more generally what is happening around the world at the moment and in your community and in your field. I think that is fair game.
Shruti, yeah. Go ahead, Shruti.
I was going to say it's hard to know what to add on to that. I think Samir has been pretty comprehensive. I would say that it's different for different people. I wasn't really asked any questions outside of the documents that I had provided at the first stage interview. And the sense that I get is that that's most people's experience. So I would say don't worry about that aspect of things so much. And like we've emphasized, it's completely okay to say that, you don't know, but you can see it potentially being related to your work or to areas of interest in these ways. So I think in that sense, approaching it as more of a conversation rather than you have to provide the right answer is the best way of doing it. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I wasn't really asked any current affairs stuff at this stage, but I think having a broad general understanding helps. And it's also maybe something you might want to weave into your answers if you work on something that's very topical, for example. But yeah, not something I would worry too much about right now.
Daksh, do you want to add anything?
No, I think mostly it's been covered. Also, it's very discipline specific. For example, if you're in a STEM discipline, or in a very technical discipline, and you're applying for a research degree, right? Like that combination will mean that you're likely to get questions which are related to, say, the research frontier in that very specific field, because you want to do research in that field, right? Outside of that, if you're applying for masters or if you're applying for other degrees, the technical questions will mostly be focused on already existing knowledge rather than like latest developments in most cases, because you're not really required to know the latest developments to even do research. And it then the questions are much more likely to be about things like policy, about news events. And so, as Samir said, being a conscientious citizen, just knowing things that are generally happening is good enough, because then it's just about adding your own analysis and thoughts to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm also gonna just quickly say one thing about this. So I can give an example from my interview round. I had this actually wasn't even my area of focus, but I had mentioned in my CV that in one of the internships that I did, I had worked on the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, and this was a year before my interview. And then during that 1 year, there were a lot of amendments that had been made to the act. And so one of the questions that I was asked was about the amendments. And then so I got asked two questions. One was like a more factual, like, oh, like what do you think of the amendments? Factual in the sense that it was still my opinion on those amendments, but it was assumed that I would know what the amendments were. And then second was about just like these two cases that had given conflicting judgments, and just what my opinion was on the abortion laws in India. So that's just an example of like how what you've done can be weaved into just like recent developments. I know this is very law specific, but I thought it might be helpful to have that. Okay, so okay, I think there's quite a few hands raised for a while. So Akash, and then Shanti, sorry, and Nehal, but please very quickly if possible.
Right. I just wanted to quickly ask, because it's a technical round, as you said, how much of the personal statement or our personal experiences or our motivations for why this is the academic pursuit that we want to take, how much of that can we rely on or discuss in the interview? Are we even expected to or allowed to do that?
I can take this quickly. There's no bar as such. I mean, of course, your personal statement and your academic statement are going to form the basis of this. But then if you're asked a question which is purely technical, it may not be helpful to bring in personal experiences. But if you think that those personal experiences are relevant for that answer, absolutely do draw on those personal experiences that you have mentioned in your personal statement or haven't mentioned. You can go beyond personal statement and other statements that you have written here. So what I would sort of take away from this is, if it is relevant, mention your personal sort of experience. If it's not relevant, there's no need to go into that. Sometimes what we do in answering questions is we prepare a few points, right? And we make sure that we say them. And then there's a question that doesn't require them and we say them regardless. And I think that's not what you should do, right? If there are points that you think you need to put across in the panel, put them across only if they are relevant. Don't put them across regardless. Sometimes applicants will be asked a question and they will randomly plug something that they think in their head is important, right? And it does not really make sense in answering that question. So always try to listen to the question carefully, understand what they are asking and stick to it. Don't go beyond it. Don't bring experiences that are not relevant. But as I said, the general rule is, in my opinion, answer the question very directly, and do rely on your personal, professional, or other experiences as may be relevant.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Shamli, sorry.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Shauli, and my question was it was regarding resubmitting the entire application after signing the online agreement. So after I resubmitted, I received a mail, and in the mail it was written that you are receiving the mail because you have resubmitted your entire application process, and after the completion of the deadline, you are not supposed to resubmit it. So it actually creates a bit of confusion that there was this resubmit option after signing the online agreement, and then after resubmitting, you are again getting a mail that you have pressed the resubmit button. So it's a bit confusing.
So from what we've come to understand, that you are supposed to resubmit your application, and it's fine that you did. And even if you received an email, it's fine. But if Bela is still on the call and wants to just clarify this, because it seems like there's some confusion from questions in chat.
Yeah, so there was an online agreement that has to be signed. There may be technical issues with certain applications. For your specific case, write to me and I will look at it from the back end. Okay, Shauli?
How can I write to you? I mean,
The same email from which I sent you information. I think it's india.secretary@rhodestrust.com.
okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Great. I hope that clarifies for everyone who's also asking about this in chat. Nehal? We can't hear you, Nehal. Is it just me? Is anyone able to hear? No. Nehal, do you want to maybe try to? Yeah. Okay, maybe yeah, okay, Nehal. In the meantime, Rishika, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much for the session. And my question is very related to my application. So my entire experiences, my motivation, personal statement, whatever it is, it's basis the experiences. So it's a very practitioner sort of application and not related to the academics, right? It was majorly basis on the work ex I had and majorly the entrepreneurship project which I sort of undertook. So for the interview, do I really have to prepare going into the theoretical sort of aspects, and should I just reiterate the personal experiences which sort of framed my motivation? I mean, I'm sort of not sure about it. How should I go about it?
Anyone?
I mean, I think I'll just reiterate what Samir just said about like in a very similar in response to a very similar question. I think that I would think that you should expect some slightly more subject specific or discipline specific questions because you are applying for an advanced degree, right? Like a master's or a PhD program. So I would say that expect some level of like having to answer questions about that proposed field of study or your past study. And so I think it would help to bring in personal experience and motivation where that is relevant to the question that's asked. But it may not be relevant in every in response to all the questions. So like Samir said, be thoughtful about exactly what the question is that you're being asked and try not to go in with a predetermined set of answers that you want to give them, right? Because then that might mean that you don't listen carefully enough to the question that is actually being addressed to you. So that would be my advice.
Thank you.
I also just want to add one like very quick thing, which is that I mean, of course, what Shruti said, adding to that is, I mean, it would still be helpful to go over just some like theoretical concepts that like underlie your research, because at the end of the day, you are planning to do an academic degree at Oxford, and you are choosing to sort of like take a step back from your work, or I mean, do that along with it. But there is like something that you're going to do academically for 1 full year or 2 full years, or more if you've applied for a PhD. But since you have chosen to do like an academic course, the expectation is that you have an academic interest in something, and so you might be asked questions that relate to that.
Got
Shreya, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. I had a question regarding the atmosphere of the interviews. Did you find it very grilling or pushing back or more empathetic or understanding in that sense? And also, was there any question that put you off or threw you off? How did you handle that? And I think you mentioned wrong answers sometimes. So what does that entail? How do you know it's a wrong answer? Or yeah, thank you.
Maybe
Yeah.
between Daksh and Misbah, you had online interviews, so you can answer this better.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, do you want to go first, Musa? Yeah, so in terms of the atmosphere of the interview, it really depends on the panel. It's never going to be too grilling. It's not going to be a roast. It's not going to be, I don't know what a grilling interview context is, but it's not like they're trying to make you break down. They're trying to get you and catch you out and make sure that you say a wrong answer. So it's not that much. But in terms of the level of understanding, it varies. With panels, some of them are a little nicer in how they approach interviews. In most cases, they'll be decently empathetic and fairly polite with the discussion. You can sometimes see that they're also having long days because they're doing so many interviews. Uh, so even despite that, they'll always be nice, in my experience at least, and from what I heard. And in terms of the wrong answer thing, uh, sometimes they'll point it out to you, sometimes you'll realize once you're back home. So in my case, I realized it back home because I was like, that did not sound very right, and I checked it and it wasn't. But yeah, so they're in some cases they do push back and also give you pointers. So if they can see that you're getting confused between two concepts, they might give you a certain direction to see, oh, does that help you recall? And for me, in one case, that did help. Like once I was giving the point, I was like, oh yeah, and then I was able to recall the thing that we were talking about. So yeah, that's one way if they're trying to push you in a certain direction, especially. So there are two kinds of questions, right? One is an opinion-based question where they're just asking about what you think about something. In those cases, like if you're doing a policy analysis, if you're in law or economics or something like that, there's no wrong answer. It's just your analysis and it's fine. If they're asking you some definitions or if they're asking you about what is XYZ, that is where you can sometimes get something slightly wrong and then they can try to hint you towards the right direction and see if you were able to get it. Otherwise, they just move on. So it's not a very big problem at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really to add, just to say that, I mean, I felt like we lucked out because all our interviews were online, and in a sense there's like it's more calm because you are in your own space and you are able to sort of, create that distance which you wouldn't be able to do in an in-person interview. Um, I think especially for the preliminary interview round, because it like is a technical interview round and it goes by really fast, like even though it's 20 minutes, but everyone, because there'll be like 3 to 4 people, everybody asks you at least 1 or 2 questions, and so you're just like that and that and done. So um so the online aspect really helps. And I think, again, as Dak said, it really depends on who is on your panel, but no one will be like outrightly rude. But even if they are, it might just be their interviewing style. And so you shouldn't take it personally, and just hold your ground and be confident throughout the interview. If you feel like you don't know an answer and they're pushing you towards an answer, like don't resist, but like be okay with them also correcting you, or like taking you in a direction, or even if it's not in the nicest way. By the end of the day, the whole interview is an assessment. So they may be nice, they may be slightly rude or mean, but that's again just an assessment of what you say, and just that. Um, I I see that there's some questions that relate to just how the interview for the Rhodes is different from PhD interview, and if you have to do a PhD, what would that look like? I know, Shruti, you've responded to that briefly in chat, but if you could sort of just go over what you said, and if anyone else has any thoughts on it, please feel free to add.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate what I said, I mean, I think that the interview for the PhD and the interview for the Rhodes Scholarship are very different things because the selection criteria is quite different. I mean, to some extent, it overlaps in the sense that both are looking for academic excellence. But like Samir said, the criteria for the Rhodes Scholarship is, like they want a conscious citizen who's kind of aware of things that are happening in the world, that, demonstrates like a certain level of consideration, passion for like broader change and social justice often. So, I mean, I think that the criteria for the scholarship is therefore wider. I like the PhD interview in my experience was very focused on my research proposal, how I planned on, like undertaking the proposed project, what my field sites might be, like forms of data collection, if I had like sufficiently looked at literature in the field. So it's much more focused on your research proposal. I think we've tried to emphasize through the session today that this interview is technical, but it's also a lot about like, your past record, the things that you've done before, and broader developments in your field, like questions that you will be asked about. So I think they are very different things because they're looking for different things from candidates. So to some extent that does overlap, and you might still be asked questions about your proposed research at this stage, but I don't think that that's the primary thing that they're looking for out of this interview. So I think just look back at the criteria for selection. I think that will give you a better sense of what they value from the responses. Yeah. I mean, if people have follow-up questions on this, feel free to ask or put that in the chat as well.
Yeah, I just want to say that we have a session tomorrow as well, and we'll have like STEM panelists. So if you can hold on to your questions that relate to like STEM applications for tomorrow, that you might find it more helpful and more relevant. And I'm also mindful of time. We have gone over the 1 hour. So I'm very quickly going to ask the raised hand. So Ashish, Soumya, Aditi, and Abhijit, please very briefly ask your questions. And we'll try to answer the remaining questions in the chat box. But if you're not able to get through, do remember we have a session tomorrow, and then we also have a session on Monday. So you still have an opportunity to ask your questions. Ashish.
Absolutely, Ms. Pa. Thank you so much. So my question specifically is to Samir. Samir, you pointed out in the discussion that um, um, a Rhodes Scholarship is not specifically looking for, if talked about the motivation of why you're pursuing this, not specifically looking for the intellectual curiosity that, just feel like you like doing it. It's looking for something else. Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
Right. So, especially for advanced degrees like masters and particularly PhDs, sometimes the reason why you may want to do that is because you want to do that, right? You're intellectually curious to understand something deeply, right? And that's the motivation. Why are you interested in stem cells? Because you're just interested in stem cells, and it gives you intellectual satisfaction to learn a lot more about these things because you're curious about it, right? And that's a perfectly fine answer when you're applying for that degree, right? And that's a perfectly fine reason as to why you want to do that degree or why you want to do that research, because of intellectual curiosity. But Rhodes Scholarship is a lot more than that, right? So intellectual curiosity, of course, forms a part of it, but it also wants to see individuals who are not just intellectually curious, but also look at the three other criteria, right? Apart from academic excellence, there are three other criteria: moral force of character, instincts to lead, your devotion to duty, and the sort of interest you take in fellow human beings, and your energy to use your talents to the fullest, right? So all of these things basically look at aspects that are non-academic in your profile. So that would be, okay, if I'm doing stem cell research, I want it to be beneficial for humanity, right? Now that is the additional part beyond intellectual curiosity. And that's the part that Rhodes will also look at in addition to that intellectual curiosity. Someone like, maybe you're interested in human rights because you just like human rights, right? And then someone may be interested in human rights because of that intellectual curiosity, but also because they want to use that as a tool to advance social justice, right? Now, that is the bit that Rhodes will also look at, because it's not just about your academic excellence, but about you as a wider and more well-rounded individual. I
Absolutely.
hope
Thank
that
you so much.
answers.
Yes.
Soumya.
So since we have 7 days around till the interview, I wanted to ask how much time we should try to give every day, or we at a minimum we can expect. And secondly, is there any particular sequence in which you prepared for things, like first are the documents we submitted and later on other things?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Does anyone want to take that?
It's a tough one, but a personal one, right? I mean, if I tell you that I didn't prepare, you won't believe me, but that's what it was, right? Of course, it may look from this side that, oh yes, now that they are Rhodes scholars, they have, successfully completed this process, they can say whatever they want. So what I mean, to answer this question, just do what works best for you. What I did was to read my documents carefully and fully, right? Like really, really well. So I was very sure of what I had written on my CV, what was there on my transcript, what broadly sort of my conversations with my referees were about, and then what was in my personal statement. We only had one personal statement back then, and we didn't have this distinction between a personal statement and an academic statement. So that's what I basically looked at. I did not do any, additional preparation on general studies, etc. Because I think I was a bit aware of those developments at that point of time, so I didn't worry so much about it. In terms of how much time, once again, it really depends. You need to, if you think that you need to brush up on some of the things that you mentioned in your CV, and it will take you some time between now and the 5th or 6th of October, then devote as much time as is needed. But also don't just do the Rhodes interview preparation in the next whatever 6 7 days you have. Try and do other things as well. um, you don't want to be in a situation where you're only thinking about this, and then you're thinking about it so much that you're overthinking about every word that you utter, every answer that you give, in a way that makes you anxious and that makes you a lot more uneasy. And that's not an ideal place to be when you are doing an interview. Be confident. So whatever helps you to get to that level of confidence, prepare accordingly. If it means just going over your documents over and over and over again, great. If it means going over your documents well and then doing a little bit of, you know, um, sort of peripheral research about those documents and about things that you have mentioned, do that. But it is a personal journey, and you will have to see what works for you.
Great. Aditi and then Abhijit, very briefly, please.
Yes, first of all, thank you for taking. I just wanted to ask if there's a set structure to the interview. And
Aditi, sorry, you're not really audible. Can you maybe speak closer to the mic?
is this better now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask if there's a structure to the interview, and if you're comfortable, could you walk us through your interview, if not specific questions, broadly what you were asked?
Does anyone want to respond to that? Maybe I can. Oh, Daksh, sorry, did you unmute?
No,
Yeah.
no, I couldn't hear the question very
So the
properly.
question is, what was the format for the interview? And if you could just give a brief about about your own interview experience. Maybe you don't have time for everyone to go over that. So if any one person wants to take that, just like a brief overview of what was the sequence of events in your interview round.
So I mean, I think the alternative guide is actually really good on this, and there are quite a few testimonials from people in different disciplines, like outlining what their experience was at the interview. So my suggestion would be just to review that material before yours, and I think that would answer the question in a fair amount of detail.
Yeah, perfect. Actually, yeah, the alternative guide even has has examples from different interviews and just exactly what the panelists asked and what the Rhodes Scholar responded as. So actually that would be the right place to go for this. Finally, Abhijit, and then we close the session for today.
Hi, sorry to take more of your time, and thank you so much. This is a follow-up to Shruti, who earlier spoke about the difference between, say, an interview for the PhD itself and the Rhodes interview. I just wanted to ask, since I am applying for a DPhil this time, what to expect for the technical aspects for an interview when one is a DPhil applicant in that case. So you did mention the detail in which a PhD interviewer goes into, but for instance, since I don't have a written down proposal right now, should I still try to have like a decent amount of clarity about the proposal, where I expect the PhD to take the DPhil to take me, and like should that be my priority over the next few days? Is essentially the reason for my question.
I think that's a hard one. I think it really depends on your discipline and also kind of what the panelists think or like want to ask you. So I think it's hard. I mean, I didn't apply for a DPhil when I went into the interview, so I can't speak to this from personal experience. My instinct would be that it's good to have a general sense, right? Like if you are proposing to do a DPhil, then maybe you might have a general sense, okay, this is the area of research. These are the methods that I'm interested in. This is why I think this work is relevant. And if you're asked questions about it, to just answer intelligently about that. But I think it's also okay. I mean, the thing with the DPhil is that DPhils evolve, right? I mean, the proposal that I wrote when I started my PhD is completely different from the PhD that I'm writing right now. And I think everyone knows that. So I think it's okay to show like a level of open-endedness about it, to be like, this is what I think is really interesting, but I think that the proposal might evolve as I continue researching it over the next few months. And I anticipate that the PhD might take me in a completely different direction as I start the research. I mean, that's actually what's exciting about research. And I think that most panelists would be open to that. So I think having a sense of the specifics, but not needing to be super granular about it would be my approach. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
That is helpful. Thank you so much.
Ms. Bhatt, I had just a couple of very brief things to say. One is about the name on Zoom. Make sure your name is your full name. Sometimes we do have our roll numbers and other things from our organizations or our institutions attached to it. Remove that. Ensure that the name is your full name as you have as it appears on your passport or wherever it does. Photos. It's also quite important. Like, we don't generally see it, but sometimes we have profile pictures on Zoom, and if it is needed for connectivity, and that you have to mute yourself, sorry, turn off your video, the thing that will show is your photo, right? Make sure it is a decent photo, if at all there is a photo, and it's not a photo that is not appropriate for an interview setting, basically, right? It shouldn't be an indecent photo. So keep that in mind. Then, I mean, Daksh mentioned this, ensure that it's a closed room. You're in a room that no one else is in at that point of time, and there is not much distraction because of people coming in or out, or someone, in the background. We saw a lot of these during the pandemic era, when your uncles and your dads and other people would just walk in with a vest, right? You don't want that to happen in an interview. Ensure that it doesn't. These are just like small things, but they do demonstrate how your sort of seriousness to it. Then, in terms of answering questions, feel free to use jargon if needed. And given it's a technical interview and you will be in front of subject-specific panels, it's absolutely fine. But you should at all times, as Shruti also mentioned, be able and willing to explain it to a wider audience so that it is accessible to every single person. But broadly speaking, your discipline, your interview panel will understand the words that you're using. So you don't need to sort of, make it so simple that it loses the essence of what it is that you wanted to convey. Know that you know your stuff the best. Like, there is no one who knows your documents better than you. You have worked on them for months, and your entire sort of undergrad and maybe master journey has led you to this point at this time now. So you know all of it a lot better than anyone else will, and that should give you confidence. But be also open to making mistakes. It's fine, if you make a mistake, as Daksh mentioned, and it's not the end of the world if you answer a question incorrectly. But be open to recognizing those mistakes as well. If you say something wrong and then the interviewer points it out, don't be so wedded to the idea that you know it so well that you can't be wrong, right? We can all be wrong at different points, and be open to correcting yourselves. And that's something that Ms. already mentioned. And then finally, be polite and kind. I think it's so important to not be arrogant. And sometimes, the confidence in your material and the confidence that you know something really well can come across as arrogance as well. It's important that you are polite, even in the face of not hostile, but sometimes slightly harsh questioning. Like, some people be like, why? What is this? How does it even matter? Right? And you may feel that, you know, what is wrong with this person? Why is this person asking this question? But they're just trying to see how you think through these things. So be polite at all times, but you do not have to defer to them, right? Polite, without deference should be the approach. But yes, where you agree with them, defer to them, no problem at all. But there is no authority as such. They are not an authority on the subject that they are interviewing you on, and you do not need to defer to them. But you need to be polite in all your conversations. And once again, know that you know your stuff really well. You know it best. You know it better than at least the interviewing panel. Thanks. That's all. Those were not a couple of things. Those were a lot more than couple. Sorry.
No worries, those were, of course, extremely helpful. Thank you so much, Shruti, Samir, and Daksh for joining us today. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. And thank you for listening to us. But this is not the only session we're hosting as part of our interview preparation webinar series. We have a session scheduled for tomorrow, 1 p.m. IST as well. And then we have another Q&A session scheduled for 1 p.m. IST on 1st October, which is a Monday. So the next 2 days, we have 2 sessions planned. You will find the information about this. I think you would have received an email about this from the India Secretariat, but you can also find information about this on the Project EduAccess social media. But you won't get the Zoom links, I think. That's all from our side. Yeah, Samir.
Just to say, the 1st of October is a Tuesday and not a Monday. That's it.
Yes, and yeah, that's all from our side. All the best, everyone, for your interview preparation, and we'll see you tomorrow and with our STEM panelists and Daksh. Okay, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Bela, and everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye, everybody. All the best.
Bye bye. Best of luck to everyone. Thank you for organizing this, Mr. and Bela.